Hello. I think everything is happening as we see here. Whoops, the entire computer started to freeze at this very critical moment of just going live. But anyway, hello everyone. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in, all of you around the world and in all the cities in South Africa. I'm glad that you were able to find some time. Those who haven't been here before, thanks for joining, and for the people that have been here, regularly, thanks for coming back and listening to us talk about some cool tech and exciting things that's coming up. So this is a very nice event happening today. We've got some really cool speakers about some really exciting topics, and I'm pretty excited just to learn about some of the things as well. So thanks everyone for coming, and let me click the next slide. So here's some of the people that's involved with the thing. Some of the team, for example, we've got Allan, Ritchie, Ronald, Mariah, and Johan, Oliver. They're going to be presenting today. There's obviously me in the bottom corner, and we've got some other folks on the call that's going to be answering questions and just interacting with you. And feel free to chat with them during the presentation as well. So now, and before we talk about what's happening today, let's have a quick look at what's sort of coming up. What has sort of just passed, as well as what's coming up in the future. Azure Cosmos DB, they've got a special conference that just happened. I think it ended today at like 1 o'clock. So you can go catch their videos on demand. The link's in the bottom below, and obviously the slides will be shared on the group later, the meetup later. So definitely go check out check out some more stuff. This has got all sorts of cool things about getting started with Cosmos DB, deep dives, features, real world scenarios, and all that sort of stuff, so that you can definitely take advantage of all the knowledge that's being shared over there. It's all been recorded, so you can check that out. And then, yes, that's correct. Another thing that's happening is coming up soon. Another exciting thing, if you are trying to get started with .NET, this particular one is focusing on .NET with C#. There's a couple of previous ones before this, as well as things coming up after this. But this particular one, you can check that link out and learn a bit about getting started with C#. We're talking like 101, what is C#, how to get started, how to get involved. So if you're interested in learning about .NET and you heard about the C# thing, this is the place to get started. It's a live stream, as well as on demand afterwards, and workshops and other cool things, so you can get involved with everyone else on the stream and learn about .NET and C#. The other thing, once you want to get involved with non-code things as well as code things, such as Power BI and Dynamics and all the other business applications, happening on May 4th. All sorts of events, some great speakers, great topics. So definitely go check that out in the beginning of May the 4th, and you can follow that link again and sort of set up your schedule and get involved in learning about things for businesses and how you can take your business to the next level with the ops over there. And finally, last but not least, another really cool event, all the goodness really for developers. If you're a developer in any way, this is the event to attend. It's obviously live streams. It's 3 days, 5, yes, 5, 6, 7, yes, that's how maths works. It's a 3-day event, and it's probably like last time, 24 hours. At least that's Ignite. I need to check the exact time, but definitely this is a really cool event. All the things that are happening that will interest you as a developer. Are you doing no code, low code, lots of code, only code? Are you doing cloud? You're doing mobile? It's all there. And one of the really cool things, we have some great demos for Microsoft Maui. So for those of you who want to know what's happening with Xamarin Forms, what's happening next, that is all going to be presented. They're preparing demos and everything already. It's looking very exciting. So if you want to do something or learn something or know something about anything to do with development, this is the event to attend. So mark it off in your calendars. And if you can't make it for whatever reason, I'm sure it'll be a great tragic loss not to have you, but they will all be recorded. So you can definitely go watch that for the next 6 to 8 months, however long it takes to consume the vast amounts of videos that they put up. So that's all we have for things coming up in the next month, except for what's happening in our user group. We've got some cool topics coming up again next month. Chromecast with Xamarin Forms, AI Builder and a Power Platform again, and developing modern software. Basically, it's going to be pretty cool, only using a web browser. So that's definitely very exciting. Desktops are dead. Get yourself a nice, I don't know, tablet, and that's it. You can write some apps and stuff on there. So that's really, really exciting. So definitely come join us again next month, and we're going to learn some cool topics, all sorts of things happening every month. So definitely join our group on Meetup. So what is happening tonight? We have some 3 speakers, really cool. There's Allan Ritchie. This dude has done amazing work in the open source community. I've seen his libraries. Probably everyone's using his libraries for those using the ACR plugins. And now Shiny, that is the sort of, it just does the stuff, all sorts of things like Bluetooth and notifications and stuff that if you have a real app out there, you're probably using some of his stuff. So definitely, I'm excited to have him on the show tonight, or the meetup tonight. Then we got Johan is going to be speaking about some cool things about what happened in Ignite. And obviously this is sort of stuff that's just happened. And again, probably he will do another talk for us after Build to share about what we found out about Build. So definitely stay for him as well, because lots of things were cool at Ignite. And finally, we're going to end off the evening with going straight to the cloud. Ronald's going to talk to us about all sorts of things that have been added to the .NET SDK, the Azure SDK for .NET, and all sorts of ways you can use it in your applications starting from today. So thanks to everyone for coming. And for those who want to know how this team stuff works, you can go into your teams on the over here by the little notification. You can tap that and you can communicate with us. So you just hit that and type in the chat. If you don't want to leave your name, you can do it anonymous. If you're happy to leave your name, we can chat to you. It comes to us and you can interact with each other. So feel free to at any time just to drop a question in there. And without further ado, I think we can hand over to Allan to share the exciting stuff that's happening with Shiny. All right. Thanks, Allan.
Thanks, Matthew. You're very professional. You sound like a DJ. It's awesome. All right, let me share my screen and hope that this works. And there we go. There's my pretty slideshow to start. I don't do this very well, so we're not going to do a lot of code demos today. So I'm just going to do a lot of slides and kind of switch between this and Visual Studio because, when we do these live things, something always fails, right? Visual Studio is going to kick me in the face or something. Anyhow, my name's Allan Ritchie. I am a Microsoft MVP and a former Xamarin MVP when that was a thing. I've been doing .NET since it started. I think that was like 2001, maybe 2000. I don't know. I've been at this a while. I'm pretty old. I do lots of OSS stuff. If you've used user dialogues or any of the Bluetooth plugins or geofencing, I've worked on those for years. Hopefully they didn't cause you too much grief. And with that, what we'll cover today is I'm going to actually explain what Shiny is. I know a lot of people go, what does this thing do? It's actually quite huge. I can't even get through all the topics in one talk. Bluetooth on its own, I could do 3 or 4 sessions on it. It's general architecture, and then the meat of the bone is that the modules and what Shiny will actually do for you with local notifications, push notifications, periodic jobs, etc. And because there's so much to cover, I mean, if you've got any questions, pipe up right away. Don't wait till the end, because I got to kind of fly through these in. I think I got 40 minutes, so I'll do the best I can with 40 minutes. So what is Shiny? The napkin sale I try to push out there is it's a cross-platform foundation to build background and device-centric services on. It provides a way to write modular and testable code while supporting needed infrastructure like logging, storage, dependency injection, all out of the box. For those that are in the Xamarin community, you probably use Prism. Essentially what I wanted was Prism for services or background services. Shiny, I do call it shiny.net. Currently my supported targets are Android, iOS, and that UWP thing that I don't think too many developers are using, and we're really not sure what the Windows future looks like right at the moment. So I support UWP, and we'll see about Project Reunion in the future. So what does Shiny solve? Kind of as I've been doing contracting over the years, I saw pretty much every app would suffer on the background. So you get all your pretty UI out of Xamarin Forms, and everybody would make that look presentable, but the background stuff would suffer. There would always be problems. GPS, background jobs in general, they just, whatever developers were doing, there just wasn't a centric way of doing it, and it was always broken, or it was always done different, and people were kind of just crying. There wasn't really anything feeding that gap. There was, of course, plugins, but plugins always had this missing stuff, or they didn't just quite jive with other things you were doing, so they really didn't fit a niche there. Even when the backgrounding was done right, it was really hard to kind of bring your services. So like if you had a SQLite database, or maybe you had some of your own data services, it was really hard to kind of bring those services to the device or to the background as you needed it. And again, when using plugins, you always needed additional infrastructure to support things like storing a notification for the future. You needed some sort of job system or alarm system to fire notifications or whatever it may be. Permissions was needed everywhere. Can I use this? Can I send you a notification? Can I work with a Bluetooth device? You needed them everywhere. So we ended up with kind of this hodgepodge of pulling in plugins from everywhere. I know Essentials did solve this in a lot of ways, but Essentials wasn't there kind of back when we were doing all this. Essentials is great, though it doesn't lend itself to testability for a lot of us old school enterprise devs. When you're working with teams of like 8 to 20 devs, if you don't have unit tests, I'm pretty sure they'll take you up back and club you or shoot you or whatever they do. So this is important in a lot of the markets, especially that I work in. If you don't have these things, it's not going to go well for you. So we needed a testable Surface API to work with. Another reason Essentials doesn't really do some of these other things is because it's the Essentials. It's the stuff that you can get cross-platform with very minimal code. But APIs like Push and BLE, especially on Android, it's really hard to get. There's a lot of code that goes in because Bluetooth and things on Android are generally, and I'm going to say it, people will disagree with it, but Android APIs are often kind of junky or clunky if they work at all. And I know the Bluetooth one is particularly painful. Android also tends to change how it's doing background year to year. It started as services, then they kind of went back to broadcast receivers, and now they're kind of into more foreground services, and it just keeps hopping between every Android major release, and you never know where it fits. And some services still use broadcast receivers, so it's really kind of a confusing hodgepodge of kind of what you're implementing when to get Android to work in the background. I still struggle with it occasionally. Shiny is moving to kind of the foreground services, which is the new model. Essentially, all that is a service with a notification that's always displaying that, hey, your app is doing something in the background. Hopefully, this is the cool kid that hangs around for a little while, so we don't have to keep changing. But Shiny will take care of that for you. So as Android gets kind of weird with how it does things, I'll adapt Shiny to deal with them so that we don't have to worry about breaking our app release to release. The general architecture of Shiny is it does have a startup app file, just like Xamarin Forms and ASP.NET Core. A lot of people ask, well, why another startup file, which I'm going to show shortly. The fact is that, Shiny and the background services are going to execute long before Xamarin Forms gets involved, or Prism, or any of those other cool things, because they haven't started a local activity. So if you're on Android, it might never fire your main activity. It might boot up your app, fire a broadcast receiver, and shut it down. So Xamarin Forms or Prism or any of those dependency injection frameworks never got started. So Shiny needed its own startup file. And I kind of wanted to have Shiny reflect kind of why ASP.NET Core is so popular. and it's something that a lot of .NET developers are comfortable with. So I wanted Shiny to kind of reflect that. We also needed logging built in from the start. For the background, it's particularly, you don't have a console. You don't see a lot of the things that are going on. So we needed something that was always readily available. That's not Xamarin Forms. Again, it's not Prism. It had to be something out of the box, and it had to be something extensible, because there's so many different ways to log an app, whether it be to a file or App Center or Firebase Analytics or whatever the case may be. We needed something that was abstract that we could take anywhere and work across these platforms. So we're going to talk more about how I've extended that in Shiny a little bit later. But it's right there from the get-go. So if your background service that you write dies, this is going to log it somewhere so that you can debug it and fix it. Dependency injection is through and through to support testing and spread your services across all of these jobs and background related events. It also makes for very testable code. I know a lot of people don't like dependency injection, but it's coming, especially in Maui. I mean, that they're trying to make it look more like ASP.NET Core. So whether you like it or not, it's going to be there to one degree or another. So let's just get on board and understand that it's there for a good reason. Reactive extensions. This is at the core of Shiny. I don't use .NET events for many reasons. One is reactive extensions I find to be far more powerful. That does come with a little bit of complexity, but the power outweighs the complexity. And they're also very good at preventing memory leaks, which I've seen many times over the years with .NET events. You know, if you work in iOS or Android, it's very easy to deallocate those delegates, but .NET events tend to stick. So I've seen people leaking memory left and right using them. And reactive extensions, while not perfect, is pretty good at dealing with things like that. Because the garbage collection is able to deal with it properly. For the background events like jobs and kind of the geofencing events that I'm going to show in Visual Studio, we do use something called Delegate Interfaces. This is to support the DI model and testing a testable modular unit that you can work with. And it's also an easy way to restore. Kind of when your app boots up, it's an easy way to restore and run things without you having to hook to .NET events or even the reactive extensions. So I'm going to show a couple of these throughout the presentation, so you'll kind of see what I mean by a delegate.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
It's the other Allan here. Yeah, a question that you're going to get often is your dependency injection. Can you swap it out for any framework that makes you happy, like Autopack or Ninject or Unity or things like that? Because there's always opinions on which one works better.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I chose the extensions from Microsoft is they already are pluggable. And I didn't want to force that because it seems like there's a new DI framework every other day.
Yes.
Out of the box, I do use the Microsoft extensions, like actual implementation of DI. It's quite fast, actually. They've done a really good job with it. And for mobile apps, it's extremely fast as well. But if you've got one that you prefer, I know the Prism community tends to like dry IOC. Yeah. And I think Autopack is still out there. But yes, as long as it supports the Microsoft extensions, it'll work here.
Swap it out, yes, because everyone has their own opinion on that. No, awesome.
Yeah, it's never going to win, but if we fall back to these abstractions, yes. do what makes you happy.
Awesome.
So the meat of Shiny, I know we talk a lot about how the core and how it's all there and dependency injection stuff, but really this is the stuff that people are after is the modules. I don't call them plugins anymore because the modules are really built on top of the core. And the core enables these modules to run properly. So some of the things you get from Shiny are periodic background jobs. I use the term periodic because they are not scheduled. They run when the OS permits it to do so. So on Android, it's roughly every 15 minutes, depending on what your battery is. iOS does some very intelligent things. So when they know your app is probably going to be running, like your user is going to be looking at their device, they tend to spin these jobs up for you. but it's not on like a time frame of every 15 minutes. It's on when the user is going to be busy. And it's actually quite intelligent. And I know some people don't like that, but it is the way it is to prevent your app from killing the phone. Shiny does the background GPS and geofencing. This is one place that we kind of have a little bit of an overlap with Essentials. Essentials does foreground GPS, but it does not do the background GPS like Shiny does. And it doesn't have geofencing because obviously geofencing is a complete background process. We have motion activity recognition. That's basically just the ability to query and ask what the user is doing or what the user was doing, like, say 5 minutes ago. Was he running? Were they driving? Are they sitting? I'm not really going to go over this too much because it's pretty much just a query to ask what the user's doing. And it really feeds well kind of into your background GPS scenarios. And it was a really easy API to get with Shiny. Local notifications. Local notifications kind of get used everywhere, especially in the background, because you want to notify your users of stuff happening. But I also needed a lot of features to happen with notifications. If you've ever done local notifications, you need stuff like scheduling, a way to interact with the user, like, hey, I want to call the server. Can I do this? So asking yes or no without ever entering your application. And I wanted to make it customizable from every aspect possible because I know Android is extremely flexible with what you can do with your notifications, almost to the point where it makes you cry. And local notifications obviously also feeds into push notifications. And a lot of people ask, well, why is Shiny looking at push notifications? I'll cover that more in depth later, but imagine being able to change your push notification provider with one line of code. And I think that that's particularly powerful, especially when we talk about things like App Center's notifications disappearing a couple years ago. So we'll get more into that a little bit later. Bluetooth LE, beacons, and there's a lot more. I'm not going to talk too much about BLE today because that's into itself is probably like 3 of these conversations. So I'll show some really quick examples. Probably get about 10,000 questions around it, but there just won't be time to cover it in depth today. So let's talk about the first thing. I talked kind of about the general architecture of Shiny, but the first package is shiny.core. This is where all the magic happens. This is what brings together all of the startup, the service injection, the logging, and the essentials. Again, yes, there is overlap with Essentials due to the rest of Shiny needing things like the power info, connectivity, permissions. I mean, you use that everywhere. And I do have settings and secure storage. This has a cool twist, though, unlike Essentials, whereas you're able to bind this to your view models. I'm not going to show this today. This is more kind of a future thing to take a look at in the Shiny samples, which I'll show at the end. There'll be a link to. But yeah, there is overlap just because I don't have a dependency on Essentials. Shiny's kind of its own framework, minus the Android X stuff. And last but not least, this brings your periodic background jobs, which is kind of a big deal. They get used pretty much in all of the modules as well. So it's feeding the rest of the modules or plugins as you have it. So that they can do the work that you expect them to do. And with that, I think, yep, I'm going to go into a sample now. So let's see, what do you think? Is the share going to switch on the first try? Go back. I think I have to cancel the share to switch the screen.
Yeah, maybe cancel it and then reshare.
Yeah. I have a huge monitor, so if I switch it too much, everybody will see like a 5K split, and it doesn't go well. All right, I think we're good. Does the font size look okay?
That looks good. It even looks good in my little producer view.
Excellent. So this is kind of the kitchen sink of configuration. Your Shiny startup hopefully won't be this big. This is kind of everything being pulled in. There are more. I've kind of gone a little bit light for the demo. But this file can get quite large if you're using all of the Shiny services. So again, we've got beacon ranging, beacon monitoring. For those that know iBeacons, you'll know the difference. We've got GPS with these delegates, which we're going to look at as we come to each topic. And we've got push. I've got 3 push modules registered here, but you're not going to end up using that. So this was kind of just to get a hint of what this looks like, what the Shiny startup looks like, kind of sidestepping to what ASP.NET Core does. We have a startup file. We register stuff with the same service collection that ASP.NET Core would use. So it's hopefully comfortable to developers using Shiny. It should look relatively familiar. You don't have to worry about stuff like singletons unless you're registering your own services. Services. It's all right here for you to do what you need to do. All right, and with that, let me go back. Is there any questions about the startup before I move on? Because a lot of people go, what is this for? What's it doing?
There's no questions from the audience.
Okay.
I imagine just for efficiency, just a question around that. What you don't use, of course, is linked out, so it won't be part any bloat towards your application.
Shiny doesn't do. It's not like Essentials where you bring in the whole package and then it links out what you don't need. Shiny is a whole bunch of different packages because you can take in a lot of dependencies, especially for things like GPS. There's a whole lot of dependencies that come in with that. So, well, a lot of it does get linked out. You just don't install the packages you don't need.
So you choose a specific package for whatever you want to use.
Okay. Exactly.
Makes sense.
All right, now I got to jump back. I wish Teams had a friendly button where I could just say share this screen now. All right. No, I didn't want to share that.
No, you're showing your monitor.
Yeah, that would have looked like 5K. It actually closed.
Yeah.
I think PowerPoint crashed on me. Hang on 1 second. Personal.
You know, the nice thing about the startup when we're doing for Maui, it's the way that you can sort of compose your app up, as I see with your one there. Use this, use that, add this, configure that. You know, I want to override this, and that's been definitely very cool. And yeah, so hopefully people using Shiny will enjoy using Maui, and you can learn from what you've done with that.
And there'll be a lot of overlap. My plan is to kind of port or shim to you guys when you release. Slideshow. All right, I think we're back. There we go. And share.
Yes.
There we go.
We're back.
Oh, and I went back to the beginning. All right, there we go. I think we're back here. Okay, so moving on from core, probably the next most used package is locations. This is, again, kind of to your point, Allan, is that it's kind of the first module or secondary NuGet package that you would install. Locations is actually kind of a mixture of 3 different services, and you kind of mix and match what you need. The reason for this is because GPS and geofencing really kind of overlap. They're really kind of the same thing underneath the hood. And then motion activity recognition is also here. To explain why it's here, ask Google. They decided to put it in their Android packages for whatever reason. And I think really it's because motion activity recognition is really used quite a bit with GPS. Maybe you've used it a bit in the past, but it's certainly used in a lot of the apps I'm working on right now. It's important to know what the user's doing at the point of GPS. So maybe that's why they put it here. But I really can't answer that beyond Google deciding to mix it all into Android X the way they did. The Android provider with Shiny is pretty intelligent. A lot of phones, it turns out, don't have Google Play services installed. I actually haven't seen this too much, but I know in European countries and other places of the world, they don't all come with Google Play services. So both GPS and geofencing will swap mechanisms intelligently based on if Google Play services are present. That's kind of a new thing. I don't think a vast majority of plugins out there do this. I certainly know mine didn't do it. It just depended on GPS and and Google Play Services. If it wasn't there, too bad, you're out of luck. Shiny just basically switches off geofencing to an active GPS monitor if it doesn't have the Google Play Services equivalent. So 2.0, one of the problems with, I think it was Android 10, maybe 9, kind of the broadcast receiver for GPS stopped being real time. And people were like, well, how do we do this now? I know I had that problem. How do I just want to monitor a person walking in the background? We're not using it to spy on them. It's a line of business application. So this left a lot of developers, including myself, kind of angry, like, what do I do? The answer was Foreground Services. Basically, Android just wanted to enforce that you're telling the user, hey, we're probably murdering your battery in the background. But you need this because it's a line of business thing, not because you're spying on the user. So it's not a bad thing. I get why they're doing it. I just wish they quit flip-flopping. But again, that's one of the sell points for Shiny, is that it'll deal with that forward. So as a new permission comes along, or Android next week decides broadcast receivers are back again, we'll just update and we'll deal with it version agnostically without you ever having to deal with that problem.
Yeah, that's really nice. So all the issues are your issue. That's
essentially.
Nice.
I mean, the Xamarin Forms team would know this, right? Every time there's a problem with the tooling, it's Xamarin Forms problem. So it's kind of the same issue. Yeah. If Android changes tomorrow, I got to have a new permission. Android 10 added background GPS, but it still didn't mean real-time background GPS. So, these are just kind of the motions that you'd have to go through with every app you have in the wild, or you just have to update a library. I'd much rather update a library because things get done faster. And you notice I don't say iOS in a lot of these slides. iOS just works. I'm not really a fan of the Android APIs. Obviously, you can tell in the tone of how I go through this presentation. But the iOS stuff always works. There's never a problem. You know how it's going to work. It uses delegates. Its GPS works like perfectly all the time. They just make sure, again, that you're asking the user's permission every step of the way to make sure that you're not doing anything you shouldn't be doing. And now I'm going to switch over again. My apologies, it's just the way it works. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. And you can already stop the share. There we go. There we go. So now I'm going to open our GPS examples. So here's kind of your standard view model. I'm not going to go, I'm using a little bit of reactive extensions here, but they're not really important. We're just assume it's creating a command. So Shiny still allows you to work with GPS in the foreground if you want. It's quite common, maybe you have a map, or you want to move that dot across the map as you're driving. You can monitor this. It's got a when reading. I know a lot of people will tend to broadcast things from a background delegate, which I'll show in a minute. Don't do that. Anytime that there's something that you can work with in the foreground, I'll emit an event or an observable in this case. This is a reactive extensions thing that you can work with in the foreground. Delegates should remain as a background things. They should never touch your UI because your UI in a lot of cases won't be there. So anytime I have one of these, there'll be some sort of observable. So in this case, I'm checking when a reading is coming in. So this will be a GPS reading. And there's lots of data in the reading. I'm just choosing to show the latitude and longitude of what's coming out in the reading. But there's lots of things you can work with here, like GPS, I think speed is part of this. Yeah, speed, accuracy of your GPS broadcasts, lots of data to work with, however you need to work with it. The important thing here is GPS is a little bit different, where there's many ways you can request how the GPS works. You can throttle it. If you're doing this in real time, so I'm doing a real time, and this parameter just means I'm doing it in the background. This kind of determines, first of all, are you allowed to work in the background? So it'll ask that permission. And secondly, it's just going to blast your delegate with GPS coordinates as fast as they come in. This is apparently what a lot of people want. I know I've had to use it in the past. It's particularly important if you calculate things like an odometer or speed or any of those things. So people want the real time. Just be prepared. You know, it hits really fast. So this is how you do it in the foreground. We're starting our GPS listener, but the background is really where people want things. So as I showed in the startup earlier, we've got this use GPS. And here's our delegate. So there's nothing magical to it. It's basically just, hey, we're going to fire this on reading when a GPS reading comes in. We're going to see in several of the other delegates, I kind of show an example of you throwing a notification. If you like your users, don't do notifications here. This GPS reading is going to get blasted quite frequently. I generally suggest that people, you know, send it to an API to say, you know, user A, I'm here, or store it to a DB for later. But certainly don't do anything like notifications here. And by the way, these delegates support dependency injection anyways. Like if you wanted to bring in, if you did want to hate on your users, you could bring in things like notifications. Dependency injection, because it's all out of the box. It'll work here if you need it. So that's a quick show of GPS. Again, I'm flying through the modules. So if anybody has questions, feel free to ask. And I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint. I want to press the leave button. I almost pressed the leave button. Then you have to re-invite me. All right. Let's see, did I go too far ahead? So Bluetooth LE, like I said, this is a huge module unto itself. If you've used BLE or my plugin, it's more or less the same. The reason for its existence is one, cross-platform, obviously, and the second was if you've ever done Android BLE, it's terrible. It's a terrible experience. There's so many problems. If you've used BLE to any sort of usage on Android, you've probably encountered the dreaded GAT133 error. I know that sounds very technical, but trust me, if you do BLE on your own with Android once for yourself, you're going to hit it. Everybody does. I've hit it. I've sworn about it. I've lost hair. I've grown gray hairs because of it. It's just a violent API to use. The good news is that Chinese pretty battle tested around it. I've encountered it so much that I've learned how to deal with these problems. It's really, there's so many things you have to come at it, and the fact is that BLE is an asynchronous protocol, but Android and iOS to a far lesser degree force you to use it as a synchronous API, which is part of the problem. For those that don't like RX, do know that this is where RX starts to really show and shine in a lot of degrees. BLE is the perfect protocol for it. So if you are going to do BLE, it's not really task-based and shiny. It is all RX for a lot of reasons, and I can show some of them shortly. If you do use the library right with RX, you can literally in a couple lines of code find the device, so scan for the device, connect to it, read a characteristic off of it, and close the connection on it. And that's really powerful. I know a lot of people fear how RX works there, but if you even think of something like scans, scans are happening, you know, when you start them, they can go forever if you want them to. So it's not really appropriate for tasks. And again, my hate for events and memory leaks is why you don't see events emerged for that. For those that have used Shiny BLE, 2.0 introduces a bunch of new cool stuff. I'm not going to show them too much today, but managed scans, it helps you allow, it deals with all the cruft of scanning for unique devices, but you can still monitor things like RSSI, and you know it'll remove devices if they aren't heard from in a specific period, which is often what people want to, you know, they want to do on their lists. Generally, when you're coding this up yourself, you'd have to start a timer yourself and say, you know, I haven't seen device A for 30 seconds, you know, remove it off the list. So with these managed scans, it does all of that for you. And again, if you've used BLE, there's now a managed peripheral. It'll deal with hooking back to your characteristics on disconnect, which is kind of a common problem we have to deal with BLE, is connecting and disconnecting. And then when we reconnect, we have to still get the characteristics to be able to read and write to them again. You can't just hold them in memory. That's kind of a limitation of the OS. I'm going to kind of couple this sample just so we're not swapping back and forth. I'm going to go to beacons, and then I'll show both samples because obviously BLE and beacons are kind of one and the same, and they do overlap here a bit. So this is iBeacons. Shiny does have a beacons protocol, but it's iBeacon based. It's not whatever the Google equivalent is. I don't see too many of the Google, I forget, the name escapes me for what they're called right now. But I don't see too many of them in the wild. It seems like kind of iBeacons won this war for the most part. Eddystone, that's what they are. That's what Google's equivalent is.
Eddystone.
There we go. There doesn't seem to be too many in the wild, and the iBeacon seems to be a really good solid protocol. So the one in Shiny is probably the only fully C#ified beacon client that I know of. I wrote it based on the BLE, Shiny BLE. So all the scanning is 100% C#, and it works with beacon monitoring in the background. Again, thanks to Foreground Services on Android. And the ranged, kind of the managed scan I was talking about in BLE also applies to iBeacons, which I'm going to show in a second, which really reduces the amount of code you have to do for seeing or not seeing your beacons, which is pretty powerful because it really does save you a lot of code. And with that, I'm going to switch back again. Blame Teams, don't blame me for having to switch. Would really be nice if they had just a button. I hear there's a couple guys from Microsoft on the call. They'd probably appreciate feedback.
Yes. We just blame Matthew for it.
There's that feature, that smiley face. Click the smiley face. Let your feedback be heard.
There's no feedback button in Teams, is there? It's very well hidden if it is there. Okay, so to show just a general purpose BLE scan very quickly, you inject your BLE manager into your view model. You can call it, you can scan pretty much heuristically for all BLE devices, and then you can add them to a list. The problem with doing this is that scan results often duplicate per device. And the reason for that is things like the RSSI and the device name of your peripheral is constantly changing or updating as the BLE scans. So you get a lot of duplication in this. So you have to write code to deal with that. I do have another extension method called scan for unique peripherals, but this doesn't give you scan results. So you no longer see the RSSI or the device name changes, etc. So it's a trade-off. And people generally need both. So there's lots of code that would have to be applied in order to do that, as well as, like I said, removing a device that hasn't been seen for several minutes. You don't want it on the list anymore because it's obviously not broadcasting. So this is some of the code that you'd have to deal with and a lot of writing that you would have to do. So if I show kind of the managed scan, this guy, there's a little bit of magic going on here, which we won't talk too much about, but this guy deals with everything. So it's going to deal with your observable collection for you. So as you can see, I've created this managed scanner. I'm returning peripherals from it, and I'm dealing with all of this behind the scenes. So this is going to do stuff like dealing with making sure you're on the main thread when we update the observable collection, because Forms doesn't like when you start mucking around with its collections. Off thread, because obviously it can't draw it properly. There's also things like synchronizing this collection because these scan results come in really rapidly. So this guy deals with all for you, and you have to do very minimal lifting to get those benefits. So again, if you think about that in terms of how much code you'd have to write, it's a lot. And I'd encourage people to look at the GitHub source control to kind of see how all the magic that goes under the hood for this guy.
Oh, that's really neat.
If you've worked with BLE, you kind of get what I say.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to explain in 5 minutes.
I hate that because it replaces half the code I've written for the last 6 months.
Yes, you're making us sad now.
That's awesome.
That's really neat. While you're there, an off-topic question that's been raised. What is
Sure.
that rainbow thing that you're using for indents?
Oh, Rainbow Indents is, I believe, is the name of the extension. I use it in VS Code and. Sorry?
Is that the name, rainbow indents?
I'm pretty sure. I'd have to check actually. It must be. No, I'm not installed.
Indents rainbow. There it is.
There
the
it's
second
indent
bottom.
rainbow.
Yep.
It's beautiful. I love it. It's the only color I get in my world because a lot of people like to run in black and the black screen or the dark mode. I swear by this because I'm a bit OCD about my spaces. So this kind of shows that I'm doing it properly. And if you do it, if you do this, it's like no, that's not right. Fix it.
Yes, I show the white space, the arrow or the dot, and I cry every time. I have to line them up.
Well, and if I have extra white space after it, Visual Studio doesn't do a good job of showing it for me. But I have, when I press Control S, it kind of trims it all for me. So it's when it goes in, and if I'm going to read it in a Mac environment, everything's pretty. It's the way it should be. It calms my OCD about my code.
Beautiful.
So to kind of backtrack just a bit here, one other thing I wanted to show, and again, this is a little bit RX driven, so my apologies for those that don't like it. But this is a way of showing really how fast you can work with Bluetooth and RX if you're doing this properly. So in this example, I've got our BLE manager. I'm scanning for a specific peripheral, whatever it's named. In this case, it's not scanning for anything in particular. I'm saying if we're not already connected to it, go out and connect to it. And then once we are connected to it, read the characteristic from this service and this UID, and then return that data to me and put it into maybe just a simple property so Xamarin Forms can display it. So maybe you're getting the temperature reading off a temperature that's outside your window, like a little IoT device. This will kind of do it in one line of code. It'll also only take one before it actually goes and closes the device and everything to do with it. It just does it in one shot and off you go. So again, for those that have worked with BLE, you really do understand how much code this is saving you in the long term. And it's just using the power of RX to kind of get you through that pain so you don't have to deal with it. And then for beacons, again, trying to be really quick and cognizant of the time. I think I'm running out of time. Here is our beacon view model. I can do some ranging. I can add it to a list, but this still doesn't deal with the add remove scenario. I can start my monitoring. I can stop my monitoring. And then my background delegate. This is where now you can start to do cool things with like notifications. As it sees beacons in the background, you can say, okay, what did the beacon enter? If it did, depending on what's happening, if they're entering or exiting, you can send them a kind of a nice message to say, hey, I see you, or hey, where did you go? This is kind of some of the cool things you can do. And a lot of stores use these in their apps to determine if you're entering their store or not. And then the managed scan again, this is just basically doing the same thing as BLE. As it sees a beacon, it will display it on your list. And if it doesn't hear from that beacon in a certain amount of time, it'll remove it from your list. And now I'm going to switch back one more time. To PowerPoint. I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm not going to show any code examples for these guys today, but other things Shiny has is HTTP transfers. This allows you to do background uploads and downloads. So if you've got images or maybe you want to pull certain photos from a user's library, as maybe your line of business app requires you taking a picture of an action, like how Amazon takes a picture of your package to say, hey, look, we dropped off your package. they could take that picture, swipe the app away, and it would go to a background upload. So this will run, if the phone is off, and as internet supports it. It supports resuming transfers. So if you're downloading like a 10 gig file for whatever reason, it'll support resuming the download or the upload if your server supports it. You can do some cool things in the foreground, which I know a lot of people don't do. They just kind of show the doily of doom. But if you wanted to, with this service, you can track metrics like % completed, time remaining, and the speed of your actual upload or download in bytes per second. And then you can use cool tools like Humanizer, if you're familiar with it, and make that look to something readable instead of like, hey, we're transferring 10 million bytes a second. So there's cool things you can do there with this plugin. Notifications, I kind of showed it briefly before. The reason Shiny has this is because you end up needing notifications everywhere. Again, to show, I've done something in the background, maybe you care about it. If you want to, like I showed with the beacon, you want to say, hello, welcome to our store, buy lots of stuff while you're here. This is kind of the reasons you would do it. And why notifications is part of Shiny, because you need those local notifications. But I also needed to support a bunch of things with Shiny and notification stuff like scheduling. So maybe 5 minutes after the users, left the store, I can record that event, schedule a notification for 5 minutes later saying, wait, come back. We'll give you 90% off if you return to our store. Maybe you want to have some cool custom sounds for branding. And then I also wanted to have the ability to have actions so you could reply in the notification without ever entering the app, and also include stuff like text entries, so that you could even do like a chat app with notifications without ever entering your app. So that's kind of covering notifications. The other thing that in order to do notifications successfully, again, the Shiny core has to provide a lot of lifting to get Android, working, such as persistent storage, permissions, jobs to actually run the schedule. iOS has that all out of the box. Android has none of it. So that was one of the things that it really kind of enabled notifications in Shiny. And last, I needed a shared mechanism to work with push, which we're going to get to right after this. So here's just a quick example of how we do kind of a geofencing with the notification and reply. So in this one, I'm registering, and probably nobody can see my mouse, my apologies. I'm registering a geofence delegate. I'm registering notifications with a bunch of categories or actions. And then I'm setting a geofence to start monitoring for the CN Tower, which is a very popular landmark in Canada. So if you, basically what I want to do is say hi or bye if they're within range of the CN Tower. So when the geofence comes in, I inject my notification manager. I watch for the geofence status and I create a notification. If they're exiting, I say goodbye to them. If they're entering, I send a hello. And it's just a very basic way of working with geofencing. The notifications, if I chose to actually have a response in them, you can send, you can monitor this on entry. And then if they replied yes or no, you can see kind of how the notification, you can reply to them saying, hey, thanks for entering yes, we've recorded your response. And if they're saying, I'd like to buy a ticket to the CN Tower, check your app, you have a free ticket. So you're able to respond to these actions and text notifications as they come in. Again, this is just a really quick example to see how you can actually work with notification delegates in this sample. And this is just kind of an example of how it works on Android, or sorry, this is iOS. iOS is much better for taking screenshots. Beautiful.
There's definite bias here to iOS.
Yeah, oh, for sure. There has to be. There has to be. So push, Shiny push, this is push providers come and go overnight. So I really wanted to have a push notification mechanism that I could swap to with a single line of code. Turns out that wasn't too hard to ask. And the reason for this is Google seems to change mechanisms every few years. Right now, the cool flavor is Firebase. I think that one's going to stick around, but who knows? App Center's come and gone with their whatever they had for push, died pretty quickly. And there's been countless service providers that have offered push notifications over the years. I can't even name them. There's been countless. And it turns out push works the same on every platform, kind of because it's driven by the OS. So it was really easy to get an API that worked cross-platform. And what if we could change these providers? So right now, Shiny out of the box is supporting Firebase on Android and iOS, Azure Notification Hubs, and pure native if you have your own push provider. So that you can change between them with a single line of code. And there's also some providers out there that support tagging. For anybody that does notifications, they're probably using Azure or Firebase, and both of those mechanisms support tagging out of the box. And I'm also planning to look at other providers like AWS and OneSignal in the future, just to kind of grab users that may see the eventual death of one of them. Well, probably OneSignal. I'm guessing AWS is going to be around for a while. And
so does Shiny use notification hubs?
It does have a provider for notification hubs. It has a provider for Firebase, and it has a provider for native, so you can swap between them. And I'll switch back quickly. I know I'm running out of time here.
Okay, can I interrupt you there with just a question that's
Absolutely.
been raised around BLE?
Yep.
Yeah, Sean says it looks great, but there's a question around that. Is it easy enough to send and receive multiple sets of data to different characteristics?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, is it easy enough to send and receive multiple sets of data to different characteristics?
Yep. It's very easy to pull out the actual characteristic itself and do a read and a write as you need to. Back in that example, I'll just go back to this really quickly. So here I did a read, but write is also there if you wanted to write to it directly. Once you have the peripheral and a connection to it, which would be from these two here, you can pretty much do whatever you want with that peripheral. And basically the peripheral is what's ending down here. So we've got iPeripheral. I know you can't see that, but unfortunately I can't make that variable name bigger. But once you've got the peripheral, you can pretty much, sky's the limit with how to read and write to your characteristics.
Yeah, because it looks like Sean's issue is he has to do some like toing and froing to get the device to give data out. So negotiation needs to happen. So it's probably transmit receive type situation.
Yep, and like I said, once you're there, if he's got like a flow control where you do a read write, or in this case a write read, there's nothing to stop me from saying, you know, let's do a write first. Write characteristic, so I can pass in the service, the characteristic, and then kind of whatever data you want to put through to it here. And then if that works, you know, go on to, it's got to be a byte array. Go on to the next guy and do more work from there. Does that answer the question?
It answers it for me. I hope it answered it for Sean. Sean, if you have any additional questions around that, feel free to ask.
And I'll be around after the talk if people want to ask questions. Maybe I'll hang in the chat or however that works after.
Yes, you can answer directly in the Q&A.
Okay. So I just want to show the push really quick. So again, here's the difference between how we're registering our three push providers. So this is the native guy. This is Firebase messaging. This works on iOS and Android if you want to use it. And then push the Azure notification hubs. Here you just have to provide 2 additional variables, nothing too big. And here's our delegate. So this is kind of the events that come out of the push delegate. If you're entering them, just like the notification delegate I was showing around the geofencing, when your notification is received in the background, so you get the notification as well as the data from that notification or from that push notification. So this could be something like, hey, go and sync data, or, you know, whatever you want to do from the background is the sky's the limit here, as long as you've got about 15 to 30 seconds to work with it. So whatever you want to do in the background, this is the kick to get you going. And then last but not least, you have to deal with token changes. This is more of a Firebase thing. The token changes periodically as it's refreshed. A lot of users probably want to broadcast that token with the user ID to their backend to manage. So this is how you would deal with those changes. And then very quickly, how we register for a push notification or push notifications. I'm injecting my push manager. Here's an example of the foreground. So when a push notification is received in the foreground, maybe we still want to deal with data here. So again, this is so we don't have to broadcast data from our delegate. And this is basically how we request. So we request access to a push notification. If the status comes back being available, we'll have a registration token we can use. Otherwise, it failed for whatever reason. You just got to figure it out based on the status. And how am I doing for time, Allan? When are you going to kick me off here?
It's cool stuff. You can keep going.
Yeah.
I've been known for 2-3 hours at a time. I look up and oh my gosh, oh, that's just me. No, let's continue with the rest.
I'm starting to fly through it now, so I'm almost there.
You still have time. Our one session this evening is a short session, so you can take a little bit of that time.
All right. I'm almost there anyways. So kind of just in closing, the last of the other modules and stuff that's part of Shiny. There's just a Shiny package now. This is kind of new to 2.0. I don't show it in these slides or the source code right now, but there's actually a fair bit of boilerplate code to hook into iOS and Android. I know Maui is all too familiar with this too. So what Shiny does now is this package, through the power of .NET source generators, will basically generate all of that code against your app delegate and your Android projects, so that you don't have to. The goal is to also reduce the support questions that I answer, because 9 out of 10 issues is always to do with missing hooks to Shiny and to the OS. So it really sucks, but it is kind of the nature of how OSS works, right? We have to do these things to solve problems for users as well as ourselves. Shiny Logging App Center and Shiny Logging Firebase. These didn't exist on the Microsoft Extensions logging framework, which is now used by Shiny. So we needed something to log to these environments, because this is something we commonly use in the mobile side. And it's something I use App Center logging for pretty much everything. So it was something I needed for the back end. So when our services crash, at least I can still see it in the field. Shiny has NFC. It's not a very popular one because I haven't done too much with it, but it's there if you need it. Sensors. This is just basically all the sensors that Essentials has, but on RX. It's been around for quite a while. And speech recognition. This is the local speech to text translation. It's done by the OS layer. It works okay. It's not as popular as some of the new AI ones like the Azure stuff that works. But it does a trick if you're kind of in an offline scenario. It's not bad. So that's there as well. These are basically just old plugins that I brought forward into Shiny because it didn't make sense to just throw them out. The roadmap as we look ahead, integration with Maui and the extensions hosting model, which I didn't bring in Shiny 2 because it was quite heavy. I know the Maui team is talking to them to optimize that model. Hopefully they optimize it because it's not ideal yet. But I am looking how to integrate with that as Maui gets released in September, Matthew? September, I think. November. Yeah. I don't want to put the cart before the bull.
Yeah. Yeah, and we will hold Matthew to that date.
I just had a little cough. Yeah. But yeah, we have to go November, right? That's when .NET goes stable, so it has to go.
Yes.
So
good luck.
With that extensions model, until we're done, and what we did in Maui was to basically create our own very, very lightweight sort of services engine, that and all that stuff. So to basically not rely, you can opt in obviously, but yeah, and that we're saving like milliseconds, like double digits on a startup, and that all counts. So all these things clicking in. So
Yep.
fingers crossed.
Well, the extension model also, the hosting model itself brought in a lot of dependencies, and I didn't want to force it, just because the app hosting model didn't seem to offer a lot, as opposed to just doing dependency injection and logging yourself, because obviously Android and iOS don't work like a console or work like an ASP.NET Core app. So I chose to negate it, but you Maui guys are going to force me to take it. So we'll see. It's something I'm looking at for sure. Obviously, I call it shiny.net. So the goal has never been to just be iOS, Android, and that UWP thing that a few developers on the planet use. I am looking at WASM, that's WebAssembly, via Blazor, Uno, or maybe some agnostic version of that. It's something I'm working on right now. The future of Windows, I have no idea. Is Project Reunion coming out? Is UWP dying? Once that picture kind of shows itself, I'll look into how to make Windows kind of a cross-platform scenario there. And kind of the coolest thing I think that I feel like I'm working on right now is these app service models. They're bringing Shiny modules together to produce real-world solutions. So Trip Tracker is one of my favorites. It's GPS plus the motion activity recognition. So you can track things like a run or a drive, like if you've got business expenses or and such. Maybe you just want to see how far the user walked in a day. You can really do this with minimal code. I'll be showing this in the future. Geo Dispatching, this is kind of push plus GPS. It'll enable you to kind of send a GPS notification to a user, and if they're within range of that geofence event, it'll actually pop up a notification on the user screen to say, do you accept this dispatch, accept or to reject, and then push back to the server based on that. I think that's going to be a pretty cool module. And then probably one of the key reasons I got into BLE years ago is because I used to work with OBD and kind of vehicle computers quite a bit. If you've ever done OBD work, kind of communicating them, especially over BLE, is a difficult task at best. So it's something I'm looking to kind of cross-platform using Shiny BLE so that you can work with OBD communications quite easily. So tracking the vehicle speed or odometer or whatever the case may be, whatever data you can pull off the engine, it'll be made available via this library when it goes live. And with that, kind of had to fly through the last 3 slides, but now here's some links, and it's open for any questions that anyone may have. Blast away. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you very much. That was really, really cool. You've been doing some work, and I've watched all your libraries in the past. I never knew what this ACR, but it was the thing that I used because it solved my problems and back in the day. So the work has been good, and I know I've seen on Twitter and stuff all the positive feedback. So
those user dialogues are everywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, some of them are good.
I just had a question more on the architecture, like with those delegates coming in from, say, a push notification, right? The app's not alive. How does it remember which type to launch and stuff like that? Is that registered somewhere, or does it actually run the startup code every time, like I get a push notification from the outside?
If the app is completely down, it will reboot the app. The app delegate will run, or the Android application will run. I didn't kind of show those hooks right now, but it'll spin up the dependency injection again, and then run the delegate according to what event is running.
Okay. So, yeah.
It's kind of a necessary evil. You can't just rehydrate what was there. There is a couple cool tricks that I have in here for holding state and stuff, but it's still, for the actual push notification events, it does require that the DI engine gets going again.
Yeah. The user expects the service to be registered.
Yep.
Spawns from somewhere. It's not there.
That's also part of the reason for the startup model, because then I can engage the startup wherever I need to get everything wired. It's also why I need a relatively fast DI engine. out of the box to get all this stuff working.
Yeah, no, that's the things we are looking at now. It's like that's why we also like, okay, when we do things, also when we did it with the exposure notifications, just like, well, this runs before the app, so we have to, we tried like, oh, we could save it as save the state, but then there's situations that the state wasn't going to be, hydrated properly. So definitely cool stuff.
There's still problems that happen with that. Like the jobs engine is a little bit different. Jobs does hold some state, and it'll kind of dehydrate the jobs into a storage, like a persistent engine, so that jobs can spin up independently of dependency injection. So all your dependencies and your services can still go into it, but it'll rehydrate the actual job itself for you. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's the only case where DI isn't totally needed.
Allan, a quick question. What's the best way to understand the latest features and stuff? Is it to go through the samples?
Right now, yes. I'm trying to work on the documentation for 2.0. So everything I showed today is mostly 2.0, which isn't quite released yet. I'm right on the verge of doing it, but there's still documentation to go through to show kind of all the features with what's going on.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And just something you mentioned about the support stuff. Let's say I've got a question, and I want to think: is GitHub issues the way to go? If I want to file an issue, or if I've got a problem, or I've got and also the thing is like, okay, I'm trying to do Bluetooth and I'm not quite sure how it works. Like, is there a way that it's better for you to know? This is an open source project. You don't want to.
GitHub issues is the best place to put issues you have. Support, once the documentation's out, I'm hoping that people are going to use the documentation properly, because I try to answer as many questions there, but some of the support will kill open source. I know a lot of questions I get in open source are like, how do I do this? Well, I can't start from square one. You got to kind of meet me halfway if you want the support. So like if you're like, hey, I'm having a trouble reading a characteristic and this is the error I'm getting, then I can help you. If it's something, a question like, how do I read a characteristic from square one? Yeah, I'm probably not going to support you too much out of the box other than point you to documentation. So it just depends on the nature of meeting me halfway on the question for support.
That's fair. You're not working for everyone out there.
Yeah.
You don't provide BLE training?
I can, but there's a cost to that, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
It's all a case of time.
Like this, that's that Bluetooth. It was like, what? I remember I was doing something that's like, yeah, no, I don't want to do Bluetooth ever again. But obviously now it's shiny. I don't have to worry about doing Bluetooth because you've done it. So
well, and I know, I've talked to Jonathan Dick a bunch of times too, and I know a lot of people have asked for it in Essentials, but there's a lot of lifting to get there, and there's a lot of problems that you'll find that people come across on some of these weirdo Android devices. And it took time to fight them. It took a long time before I think all the GAT 133, that mystical error that comes in, I think I have finally put them to silence, thankfully. But I grew a lot of gray hairs in the process.
Well, that's also the thing with Essentials. Essentials is not meant to be this one library that does everything, because it's meant to be the Essentials, as you said. Shiny does Bluetooth, it does beacons, and it does it really well. So there's no point us reproducing it just because, you've done good work. The only way we can beat you is, have a better product, is to take your code and put it in our library, and then yay, we've got, which is not, and so yeah. So you've got it in the wild, so it's definitely really good to have that. And it's less work
fairly
for me.
battle tested at this point.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I don't see there's any questions. Obviously, if you've got any questions for Allan, folks can just just drop them in the chat. Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time, getting all the way from Canada to come here just to speak to us. All right. Let's see what's happening next. Thanks. Then if Allan or Dustin or anyone else has one last question before I move on to Johan.
Nothing from the other Allan.
Okay.
Nothing from me.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks.
Okay. It's interesting that my Teams camera every now and again goes, even though I've turn the camera off, the light on my camera coming on. So Teams is definitely not respecting me. But before I go to Johan, one quick thing for those who have questions about where the stuff's going. Obviously, it's going to be on the link still, but I just want to show off, sort of co-announce with Allan. We've got this nice little YouTube page which has a couple of movies. I'm assuming my screen is being correctly shared. I see a red block around it. So we're going to add the movies here, and obviously in a bit we might chop up the movies into each section for better viewing, make playlists and stuff. So I don't know if Allan had anything to say about it, any special words to commemorate.
I have no special words other than all the recordings will be found here on the YouTube channel. We will eventually maybe split them into separate little episodes and things for each talk, but at the moment the full recordings will be found on YouTube.
Yeah, and you can obviously just step through an hour in and get someone's talk if you wanted. But I have to say this, please be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment in the box below. But
slam that subscribe button.
Yes,
I forgot to say, hit that notification bell so you can be told when we push new episodes.
Yes. So you've become YouTubers.
Yeah. So yeah.
I thought we had self-respect, but apparently not.
No. We doing it all. Look at that, 3 subscribers. This obviously it's brand new, so I'm expecting after this like a 10. I'm going for like 10. Can we get 10 this month? Anyway, enough fun and games. So let me see. So we're going to be next up is Johan. He's going to be sharing about all the cool stuff that was announced at Ignite, and Johan's here, and so he's a solutions architect, and he's going to be sharing some of the cool things happening. I'm seeing. Yes, there's Johan. All right. Take it away.
And good evening, everyone. I'm going to just give a brief overview of what happened at Microsoft Ignite. So this is a recap of the March event. It was run over 3 days, and I'm going to try my best to summarize some of the highlights. There we go. The event ran over 3 days. It was attended by over 100,000 delegates. And I must point out that it is not a typical developer conference. You won't see source code, you won't see low-level technical details. Rather, it's a set of announcements and high-level overviews of new features and capabilities in the Microsoft technology stack. This is just a recap session, so I will use 15 minutes or less to go over some of the topics that I picked out. It's very difficult to go into details. I think there were over 200 sessions, so I will show and talk about a couple of highlights of the main topics that stood out for me. First of all, we had the opening keynote was Satya Nadella. His vision is a cloud platform that is decentralized, ubiquitous, intelligent, sensing, and trusted. We are blurring the lines between what's being done on premises and across public networks. The cloud experience will extend everywhere with data flowing through a hyper decentralized system. Because of COVID and many other reasons, the way we work change and the way we apply technology should change with it. There will increasingly be a balance between consumption and creation. His vision is to put tools in the hands of people to allow them to tip the scales towards knowledge workers, frontline employees, students, and everyone who create content, applications, code, and more. The future must accommodate flexibility in how and when people work. We must also address ethical principles, and that must govern the design, development, and deployment of artificial intelligence. And lastly, the system must be secure by design with zero trust built in to protect businesses' assets and personal privacy. So to summarize, the 5 attributes that will define the cloud in the next 10 years are ubiquitous and decentralized computing, sovereign and ambient intelligence, empowering creators across communities, economic opportunity for the global workforce, and trust by design. It was an excellent keynote, very well delivered. Next, we had a keynote by Alex Kipman on Microsoft Mesh. Now, Microsoft Mesh is a platform built on the Microsoft Azure, enabling developers to build immersive, multi-user, cross-platform mixed reality apps. And with over 50% of the Fortune 500 organizations having deployed HoloLens and other mixed reality solutions to drive material return on investment to their business, we have to ask, why don't we see hundreds or thousands or many, many more mixed reality experiences being developed? And the answer is, it's really complex and difficult, and developers face a lot of challenges in developing mixed reality experiences for multi-user scenarios and environments. So the Microsoft Mesh provides a platform for developers to design immersive multi-user mixed reality applications without having to worry about complex technical problems. It's trying to address the hurdles and the difficulties developers face in order to accelerate the development and the rollout of mixed reality applications. So let's take a look at some of the core components that the Microsoft Mesh platform for developers provide. Microsoft Azure is at the core of the Microsoft Mesh platform. It includes identity services like Active Directory and Microsoft accounts. And along with that, the Microsoft Graph continues to flow with the user to allow them to bring connections, content, and preferences. Developers don't need to worry about core infrastructure around billing, audio, video transmission, and the underlying live state management capabilities. It's all taken care of by the core platform. A layer on top of that provides a artificial intelligence layer and capabilities. These include some of the most complicated technical challenges in enabling massive multi-user online scenarios for mixed reality. It includes and addresses the immersive presence, the spatial maps, holographic rendering, and the multi-user sync. On top of that, we also have the SDK and UX contracts that will be released soon. So that is Microsoft Mesh. We are going to see an explosion of applications and components built on this SDK and in this developer platform. And it was a massive part of the keynote and very exciting news for us. So I would encourage you to take a look at it and jump in. There were 3 other keynotes as well: the hybrid workplace keynote, security for all, and envisioning tomorrow's keynote. These are great, so I want to send you some links that you can look at afterwards. But let's delve into the Microsoft Azure announcements. First of all is the .NET Upgrade Assistance preview. And basically this is a consolidation of all the loose standing tools and techniques that developers have used previously, and all the disjointed mechanisms that developers use to prepare and upgrade .NET applications. It determines the new .NET Upgrade Assistant determines which projects need to be upgraded. It recommends the order they should be upgraded in. It automates more tasks and upgrade process like upgrading to the new SDK style project platform or format, retargeting them to .NET 5, and updating NuGet packages dependencies. It also provides you with the recommendations and fixes for project files configuration and source code. The difference between this tool and others is that you can see the recommendations every step of the way, and you can choose how your code is upgraded. So it will leave you with confidence that you're doing the upgrade in the right sequence and in the right way. Next up was the Azure Communication Services. Now it's been around, I think, for more than a year, but in this release, ACS is interoperable with Microsoft Teams. Basically, it allows you to build a communication components, video calls, etc., or chatbots applications into a custom solution and interface that with or interoperate with Microsoft Teams, which means users from within our organization can use the familiar Microsoft Teams interface, and there's authentication and security around it, but there's also the external interface for your customers or users from outside the organization in the application that you want to build and deliver. So that's a big benefit there. Azure Resource Mover allows you to deploy your solutions into Azure region and later pick up the components and move it into another region. So it provides portability between the Azure regions. It also performs dependency analysis for the workloads to ensure a successful move. Next up, we have the Azure Backup Center. So now customers can get an aggregated view of the inventory across subscriptions, locations, resource groups, vaults, and even tenants using the Azure Lighthouse. Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes is now generally available, and it's also been extended to include Azure Machine Learning that allows customers to train machine learning models directly from where the data lives using the existing infrastructure investments. This reduces data movement while meeting security and compliance requirements. Azure Migrate is a really cool feature, and it allows or it provides a unified discovery and assessment capabilities for Windows, Linux, and SQL Server, and it will allow you to easily take a look at the different components of the solutions that you have on premise and give you an assessment of what it will take to move those components into the cloud, into Microsoft Azure. Let's move on to Power Platform. A big announcement there was the Power Virtual Agents includes new AI capabilities to allow experts in the field to create smarter chatbots, and these will enable, or these will be able to engage more naturally and accurately, and be designed to help when addressing the needs of customers and employees in chatbots at scale. There's also new Power Automate templates that include new AI capabilities such as equipment automation. And very exciting is the announcement that Microsoft Power FX is released as the first low-code programming language for logic customization across the Power Platform. The origins is in Excel, and it will be open sourced and on GitHub later this year. Now, with low-code solutions and Power Platform kind of tools, there's also a concern around governance, security, and privacy. So a new set of features enables IT pros to implement enhanced governance and security for low-code tools and automation. This includes data loss prevention features and reporting that will allow the IT administrators and security teams to keep an eye on things. In Microsoft Outlook, in the web version at the moment, we have the ability to activate the Outlook calendar board, and the Outlook calendar board starts off with your calendar, but it also has a canvas which would be empty, and you can drag and drop and activate different components that are important and essential in planning your day and your week. You can add files, notes, to-dos, reminders, etc., and have a view of your work week in a single view. Next, on to Microsoft Teams. Big enhancements, over 100 different enhancements in Microsoft Teams during 2020, and a couple of great enhancements in terms of how we present and receive and collaborate on calls, and how we set out the views that we have available. PowerPoint Live and Teams allow presenters to access notes, slides, meeting chat in a single view. Attendees can also personalize the experience by privately navigating the content, basically going through the presenter slides at their own pace. So let's take a look at it. Here we can see as a presenter, there's always been a challenge in reading the room and getting feedback from the audience. Now, with the view that's available in PowerPoint Live, the presenter can see the slides he or she is presenting, as well as a view of the notes on the slide. And the new big feature here is the ability to view a video feed of the different participants. A great thing is also the presenter mode that allows the presenter to set standout mode, or that will basically put the presenter as a video feed in front of the slides. There's also a reporter mode which shows content at just at the shoulder as a visual aid, just above the shoulder of the speaker, and a side-by-side view which will present a video feed of the presenter next to the slides. This is great and a big step forward for Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, are you saying that we don't need OBS anymore?
That's the idea.
Awesome.
Power to the people. And then there's just a dynamic view, which leaves the decision over to Microsoft Teams to kind of intelligently arrange the meeting elements for optimal presentation. Next on to security and compliance. Great feature that was released in Microsoft Defender for Office 365 is attack simulation training to help customers detect, prioritize, and remediate phishing attacks, risks, and it's now generally available. Passwordless authentication for Azure Active Directory is also generally available. Employees at organizations that activate passwordless authentication no longer need to use their passwords to sign into the network. Instead, they can sign in with a look or tap using their Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app, etc., etc. Data loss prevention for Chrome browsers on on-premise server-based environments, for example, on-premise SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016, as well as file shares, allow the administrators and the security teams to design policies that are consistent across the environments and monitor it. It also helps, the data loss prevention also helps identify and prevent accidental sharing of sensitive information. Microsoft 365 Insider Risk Management Analytics can identify potential insider risk activity within the organization and help you inform policy configurations. With one-click, customers can run a daily scan, get the feedback, audit logs, etc., and leverage the Microsoft 365 Insider Risk Management machine learning to identify potential risks in terms of activity and privacy. So there are so many features. I would encourage you, and announcements. I want to encourage you to read the book of news for Ignite 2021 at the link there on my screen. You can also go and review and watch or download or watch the sessions from Microsoft Ignite. There were so many announcements. I didn't even talk about Viva, which is the new learning and information sharing capabilities also that integrates with Teams. And I'm sure from a developer's point of view, there will be a lot of interesting topics that you can find by going to one of these links. That's it. Very brief, very high level, very short and quick overview of Microsoft Teams. Sorry, not Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Ignite 2020. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, that is definitely a lot of stuff, and I mean, basically you took 200 videos and I don't know how many hours worth, and like, oh, let's put that into 15 minutes. Yeah, so that's very nice, and then yeah, it's just just the amount of stuff that's happening, and hopefully you can actually come and do the same, condense the Microsoft build into 15 minutes. You know,
I hope so. Thanks, Mike. And the idea is really just to create awareness, just to kind of mention the items that were announced, and then the audience can look at those resources and review the videos at their own leisure, pick out the topics that really interest them, and delve into the details. It's insane to watch over 200 sessions over 3 days and get to the details of each and every item. Some of us have to work, we have responsibilities, but if this helps create, maybe there's something that one of the audience members picked up on and they can go and look into the details afterwards.
So you're out there and you see something cool, just head over to the book of news, and this book of news, eh? Yeah, yes. And just go check out some stuff, and maybe you'll figure out or find something interesting that you can use in work, or maybe it's a cool thing and you can improve your own just general Teams calls if you're doing something in your company or in a group. So definitely little bits for everyone. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And yeah, you got the links and everything. So that's pretty cool.
We need some of that mesh in our user group presentations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. All right. So, and everyone's subscribing to it. I see we've got 9 viewers, subscribers on the Teams group. Hope everyone hit the bell when this goes out to YouTube. You can also just rewatch. I know Johan went through the slides pretty quick, and also, you know, you might want to go back and see what like the 5 new things that were added to this or the 6 that were added to that. So definitely you can go pop onto YouTube probably tomorrow, whenever, and just step through that and see. And hopefully when we split it up, you can actually go back and not have to find the session in the long one, but just look at that. And maybe, and also it's pretty cool if you can find something cool, you can share it with other colleagues, like, oh, I want to recap, you can just do that. So that's pretty cool. So thanks for sharing that. And I think we probably should be doing more of these recaps there, because I know these events, there's just so much things happening. I mean like the 200 videos, and that's all the other slides and source repos and everything out there. So it is really important to have a nice summary, some starting point. So that's pretty nice. All right, and last but not least, Ronald, another MVP, is going to be talking about Azure and getting all the Azure stuff running on .NET and all the ways you can use Azure from .NET. So thank you very much, Ronald. And I see your pictures appearing. And yeah, all right, take it away.
Cool. I'm just going to share my screen, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. It's been a long day for most people. Share my screen. So I'm Ronald Maria. I'm a developer, .NET developer, and Microsoft Azure MVP from Durban. Work at a company called Imedia, and also part of the cloud architecture, maintaining the infrastructure and building our product called Fabric. So today I'm just going to speak a bit about Azure SDK for .NET and how I'm using it at Imedia and in production. So before we get into the details of what Azure SDK for .NET is, I think it'll be beneficial to have an overview of how all the services within Azure is structured. So anything that we interact with within Azure, whether it's web apps, whether it's virtual machines, all of that is done through Azure Resource Manager, or and all of that is exposed through APIs. And those APIs are consumed by various client applications or ways that you can interact with Azure, whether it's the Azure portal or Azure PowerShell or the CLI or REST clients, for example. All of that use SDKs, and SDKs use the REST API. So whenever Microsoft wants to release new features, they would release it on the REST clients or their REST API, and then all the supporting tools will consume that REST API. So why not just use Azure portal for everything? We can go into Azure and click create a resource, and it's simple enough. So why do we need other tools like the Azure CLI, PowerShell, for example? One is it's time consuming. It takes a while to click through the portal, create a new resource, fill in the fields that you need. Also, if you're doing it in a repeatable format where you create virtual machines often enough, it's prone to user errors. I remember a lot of times where I had to create storage accounts and I ended up choosing the wrong tags or the wrong redundancy level, for example, where you needed to have local redundancy instead of geo redundancy, things like that. Having it scripted in some way, whether it's the CLI or Azure PowerShell, it ensures that there's no drift in the way that we deploy. And also the Azure PowerShell gets new features 180 days after the REST API is updated. So the Azure SDK will get updated much quicker, and you would have features more quickly with Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell or the SDKs. So you don't have to wait for the portal to have the feature before you start using it. Yeah, I don't have a lot of slides. Most of my talk is a demo. So what we're going to build is an automated way of deploying a storage account using .NET SDK. And this is going to be done in a way that doesn't expose any secret information, because whenever we're interacting with Azure or the Azure portal, our Active Directory accounts are used. The way in which we deploy resources needs to be secure as well. Cool. So I'm first going to show what we have on Azure to support the code that I'm going to write. So this will all make much more sense when we know all the moving parts within Azure. Whenever we deploying anything in Azure, we need to authenticate with some credentials. So if you're building an application, then we would need an application within Azure Active Directory that acts on behalf of our application. So if we need to deploy storage accounts, then we can do that using an application that we create. So for example, I can create an application called Devon MS Developer User Group and just give it any URL, since we're not going to be using redirect URIs. This is going to put localhost. The URL doesn't matter for this. So what's important is the client ID of the application, as well as a secret that we need to create. I'm just going to call it secret and add that. And I'm just going to copy that.
Ronald, I'm not sure if it's just me that's old. Can you just maybe zoom in like a percent or two on your browser? That looks perfect.
There we go. Thank you.
It's probably just me that's old.
Cool. Yeah, so that secret, we don't need to expose that. So we also have Azure Keyword. So Azure Keyword is a service within Azure where we store keys and secrets. We can also store certificates if we want, but it's just a way of protecting our keys from being accessed or exposed in ways that we don't want. So I'm just going to create a key called ID, and I'm going to paste the ID and just make that active. I think there's a key already in my, well, I deleted one called ID, so I'm just going to call it credential ID. So it doesn't conflict with the one that I deleted yesterday. Cool. And I'm just going to call one called credential secret. And I'm going to paste that secret, make that active as well. Cool. So that Active Directory application is now, the keys for it is in Keyword. So in our application, we'll get the key and secret using access policies. So if you go to access policies on the Keyword, you'll notice that I have access to Keyword and I have permissions to get secrets, list, update, create, and all these various things. And we can limit the amount of access that I have or grant more access than that if necessary. And then I think we can move into the code. But first, that Active Directory application that we created, how it's actually used is I have a resource group called msdoc, which just has Keyword. But in access control, I can grant applications roles that are necessary. So for example, I can add a role assignment called storage account contributor. So, and I can give that role to that Active Directory application. So any application that authenticates with that Active Directory application has the permissions to deploy and manage storage accounts within this resource group only. So that way as well, we can limit how much permissions an application has on the Azure environment. That application can't deploy storage accounts within any other resource group or do anything else besides manage storage accounts. Cool. So we can go to Visual Studio. So before we get started, under Tools and Options, there is an option to set Azure Service Authentication. So this application, and whenever we deploy anything to Azure, there's a concept called Managed Service Identity. So Managed Service Identity is an identity of your application. And that locally is set to my Gmail account. Within Azure, if I needed to go to Keyword and if my application was deployed into, for example, Azure Web App or Azure Functions, then that access can be granted within access policies as well. I can add a policy and choose keys and secrets management and add an application, select the principal. So whatever applications that need access to Keyword, I can grant that here as well. So that's when it's already deployed. But within the local development, it'll use my Active Directory credentials. If anyone has access to this code, then they won't be able to do the same thing because it's only my Active Directory account that has access to Keyword. Cool. So this application is just a new Azure Functions app. There's nothing in it at the moment. So I'm just going to create a new Azure function. So what we aim to achieve is that whenever a message gets put onto a queue within Azure storage, then I'm going to process that item from the queue and deploy a storage account. That item put on the queue is just the name of a storage account that doesn't exist. So I'll consume that name and deploy a storage account within the resource group. I'm just going to call a functions class called functions and create a queue trigger, and that my connection string name will be storage, and my queue name will be import. I also have Storage Explorer, which is a way that we can view our local. So Azure Storage Explorer, you can have a local emulator for Azure storage, and you can define however many queues that you want. I have one called import already. So whenever we add a message to this import queue, it will get processed by this function, and we can test that out as well. Queue storage is not in my local settings. So let me just go to local settings, and I'll just create a new one called queue storage, and the value of it is use development storage true. So use development storage is a custom or predefined value which tells Azure Functions that you can look for the storage account in the local emulator. So there's a queue trigger defined here, and if I go to here and I put a message called Ronald, and that gets processed, we see that it will get triggered soon. Unless I'm using the wrong queue. Storage accounts, queues, local emulator, import. Refresh.
Maybe it's because you selected you got like a in the command prompt, you got like a select, sometimes it doesn't output afterwards. You know, just like hit enter or something like that little white block. No. Yes.
Oh, okay, that's new. Okay, so there should be a message with my name here. C# triggered processing Ronald. So that was weird. I didn't know that happens. So, so now we can process messages from the queue. So the first thing would be for us to get access to the ID and the secret from Keyword, and that we use our credentials that we have in the same one that we have under options. So this account. For that, we use, so before I get into coding, there's a few NuGet packages we need to add. So first we use that Active Directory credentials. There's a NuGet package called app or server side. Because of identity. Or it was listed there. App. Authentication. That's the one. So app authentication is the NuGet package that we use to interact with that identity to get access to Keyword. Then the next package that we need to add is Keyword itself. And that's to manage secrets. We'll install the Fluent API version. And the last one is the SDK for managing storage accounts. And you can just type storage management and we'll find it. Cool. Just a side note, any SDK that we want to use to deploy, for example, virtual machines or IoT devices, for example, there's a NuGet package specific for for what we want to do. So there'll be a Azure management prefix to what we want to use. For example, if I type Azure management, there'll be a lot of NuGet packages specific to what we want. So for example, if you want to manage CDNs, for example, there's a NuGet package for that. If you want to manage DNS or Redis or networks, then there's an SDK for it. And similar for Batch AI, Cosmos DB, and every other service as well. So for this specific project, we'll just be using the Azure Storage SDK. And so first we will need a Azure Service token, which is service token provider, which is a way to get access to my Active Directory credentials. And I'm just going to name this properly. So using that, we will need a authentication context, which is an just going to find the right services. Give me a second. Authentication context. So that authentication context needs an authority. That authority is a URL that points to what are we going to authenticate against. That is again .microsoft.net. Spell Microsoft properly. And followed by the tenant ID of Active Directory. So I'll just get that from Active Directory, which is that one. So the next, we will need a way that we can interact with Key Vault. So I'm just going to call that Key Vault client. And that's a new Key Vault client. That needs an authentication callback, which is Key Vault client. Authentication context and of context. Ritchie. That should work. Sorry, just having some memory.
It's a thing that happens as soon as you have to use the keyboard. Like, wait a minute, I was doing this 5 minutes ago, and now my brain is.
Nah, it's just, I think just my underlying, that's the problem. Just checking authority, and or maybe I'm just getting it wrong. That.
It's with lockdown, we get stuck in so many meetings that we forget how to code.
Yeah.
So that IntelliCode it just keeps doing it for you. Now you gotta.
Now you have to be Intelli, and that's hard.
Cool. So based on what I've done so far, are there any questions? Maybe from the speakers or from the chat?
Yeah, there's no questions here from the audience. No questions.
No questions. Okay, so this is just going to restart. And I remember how to code again. So using this Keyword client, we will need the ID from Keyword, which you can get from get secrets, async, and this is going to be, we need to have an await here and make this an async task. And we will need the identifier of both the ID and the secret. And that we will get from Keyword. So those secrets that I've created, credential ID, they're going to copy that and go back and credential secrets. And I'm going to copy that identifier as well. And go back here and paste that ID and paste that secret. These will need to be, these return an object which I can get the value, and I'll do the same thing with that as well. So just wrap that around the bracket and get the value. This should be taken out. So this ID and secret, we need to create a token credential. And that token credential is a new token credentials, and I'll pass that ID and secret. So once we get that token for Keyword, we can then use that to authenticate with the SDK. Give me a second. Authentication context. We'll need to add that. Yes, back. So the token that we're going to use for the SDK is the authentication context. And you're going to acquire a token. And that acquire takes in a resource. So we need to get a token that we want to use to interact with the API. That API name is management.azure.com. So all the APIs are exposed through that main API. And we will need to pass in the credentials. Make sure that is right. Resource client ID. Client credentials. So we get the token credentials, and we will need a client credentials. Client credentials, use that one. Cool. And then once we get a token, then we can use the Azure Storage SDK, which is just going to call it management client. Where's your storage management client? New. And just going to see what it is. The credentials and that's my naming of things. So that's Azure Storage SDK. We will also need a subscription ID, and that subscription ID, I'll get it from my subscriptions. Just going to use my MVP subscription, which is that. So using this management client, there's a lot of ways that we can interact with storage, and if we go to storage accounts, we can create a new storage account. Then I'm just gonna say, so we will need to provide the resource group name. Let's get that from Azure as well. Name. Then the next is the name of the account, which is my queue item. And the next is any parameters that we need. So the good thing about the parameters is that you don't have to remember all the You don't have to remember all the properties that you would need to set. You can just populate all of them and see what you need. I'm just going to remove all the ones that we won't be using. So when we create the storage account, we can give it an access tier. I'm just going to choose hub tier, the kind, which is a storage v2, location. I'm just going to say South Africa North. And the SKU, which is and I don't even have to remember these parameters. The SKU, we can just have a wait and see what we would need. SKU has a name, which is standard LRS. We will go with that. And the tier, can just hover over this. Standard or premium, go with standard as well. I think tier is a email. Cool. So now we can run this and it should work. Crossing fingers. This is because I attempted to use .NET 5. Just going to switch this back to Core 3.0 since I know that works. Cool. So any ideas of a storage account name that doesn't exist? Executing functions, we should say an executed, and then our storage account should be created. Authority not in a valid list of addresses. So let's go back. Probably that. Cool. So this should be login.windows.net. Microsoft still calls things Windows and not. I think it's going that way now. The mark function should be reprocessed.
Isn't the world Windows?
Yeah. Executing function.
At least from some perspectives.
Wasn't it called like Mesh or something originally, like the OG?
Yeah, I actually think so, yes.
So one of the things about using the SDK in this way is that you would need to wait for the amount of time that it would actually take to deploy this resource. So storage accounts normally take a minute or 30 seconds, whatever this amount of time took, 34 seconds. So if we deploying virtual machines, then our Azure functions would run for 5-10 minutes, depending on the type of virtual machine we deploy. So that's the only drawback. Yeah. So now if we go to here and just click refresh, should see my storage account created. So just for a bit of more real world context into how I'm using it in production. So within, so the platform that we're building at Media is called Fabric. Fabric is a platform that we offer to communities, whether it's radio stations or closed communities. Communities where the community managers want to communicate with their audience, but in a closed platform. So instead of having a WhatsApp group or a Facebook page, they have a platform that they can have intimate conversations with their audience and not be affected of any data privacy issues or any other compliance reasons. So they own their platform and they control what content is shared and what's not shared. Whenever we onboard a tenant, there's a lot of resources within Azure that needs to be created. So if we have a customer today that is new and we need to set things up for them, that means adding load balancer rules, adding monitoring, adding IoT devices, because radio stations will have a device in the radio station that serves out audio. So we consume that audio. So for example, we want to get to a point where at a click of a button, everything happens automatically in the background. No one needs to go to the Azure portal and create load balancer rules or create push notification hubs. Or if I go to an existing tenant, for example, we have an iOS app or Android app, creating secrets for them, changing the key for the push notifications, for example, or changing the tenant name, or doing anything within the tenant should all be done automatically. Choosing what bitrate they want. Everything needs to be like in a way that we can do it as quickly as possible. Even creating secrets for any other services that we need. When a new tenant is created, then all of that is done through Azure Functions in the background in some way. And we also have like a sync button where everything gets synced to other products. In a microservice environment where we have multiple databases, all needs access to the single tenant, then we broadcast that out to the various platforms that we have. Yeah. So that's some of the context and overview of Azure SDKs. Yeah, thank you. And that's all I have for today. Any questions, and feedback?
Don't think there's any in the chat.
I don't see any in the chat.
Yeah, no, that's quite nice. That basically you can integrate the management of Azure, as you had there in a function, rather than having to go like, oh, make it a PowerShell script or do something. Yeah, because often you want to do that.
Where I wanted to choose the right technology for the right problem, choose the right technology for the problem. I had to choose between whether all of this can be done using Azure PowerShell or using Azure CLI. But being a .NET developer, .NET is familiar for me. And I don't have to go and learn Azure PowerShell to do all of this, because the other issue I would have had is, how do I run it? I can run Azure PowerShell in Azure Functions, but then I just have to learn a new language. Or I can just stick to .NET, and I don't want to imply that I use .NET for everything, but if it can be done in .NET in a...
Nothing wrong with using .NET for everything. I only use .NET for everything.
.NET all the things.
.NET everywhere.
Yeah.
Does
Especially when you
Depression
need to
run those IoT devices that you were speaking about? So you creating IoT hubs as well, or using the SDK?
Yeah, I can show a bit about what we have. And I can show you what gets automated and what doesn't. So we have...
Are you sharing your screen?
No, I'm not. Let me just find Teams again. Into IoT hubs. So this IoT hub is just a device that the radio station has in the radio station. They just plug their sound. They have a sound card and they just plug their audio into it. That audio gets sent to a virtual machine scale set that we own within Azure. So we have to open load balancing ports for a new radio station, for example. So if I go to IoT devices, a device per tenant is listed here. So all our radio stations are here, and there's a lot more, and there's more. So whenever we need to spin up a new tenant, someone needs to know that they need to go to this specific resource, click create, give it an ID, and it's all tedious work that someone needs to remember. And all of this can be addressed in some way. If you go to overview, you'll see like there's a host name here. So you would just need to know, use this host name with a shared access policy, and there's a primary and secondary key that's here, or one of these that you can use. And you can interact with this resource to create new IoT devices. So if you go back to configuration and we click create, we already know the name of the tenant and whatever other slug, for example. The slug pertains to what you see here. So that's a slug. So once it created in tenant configuration, we know, okay, go to this resource and create an IoT device named with that name. So we sort of automate what someone would do.
Okay, that's very nice. Yeah. So
and
so
also
because creating those manually is tedious.
Yeah. So the same for load balancers as well. We have load balancing rules for tenants. For example, Gagasi is a radio station in Durban. There's load balancing rules for them. If we have to create a new tenant, then someone needs to go and add a port, for example. But in tenant configuration, we have a way of, let me go to a radio station. We have a way to set up, well, let me go to a tenant that doesn't have audio configuration. This one. And we can go and add audio configuration, set up live stream, set up what quality streams we want. And we will automatically know what port to open. We'll just open the next available port based on all of these rules, existing rules. And the same slug name and tenant IDs here as well. So we sort of have all the information. We just needed a way to automate everything. That as well as this audio. So because we serve audio to our apps, we need some form of monitoring so that we know when streams die, for example. If you go to availability insights, there's an availability test for every stream that we serve out. For example, if we look at Gagasi, there's a ping on a URL and we test how many locations that we want to test. So whenever a stream dies, we will know instantly that the stream is not accessible from all of the regions that we specified. And we know that before a customer or a tenant tells us like the stream is dead and please check. So we know before them that something has gone wrong. So similar, whenever we're creating a new tenant, we would have to remember that we need to create a new availability test. But this is now done automatically when we create the tenant on this front end.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah, and then you're supporting this these systems, I imagine. So
Yeah.
So when you say you know before them, you can provide support before they even know about it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we just need a way of not only creating these quick, but also having the right form of monitoring and right level of monitoring. Yeah. Because what we had I think a year ago or so, it would take probably a week or two to set up a new tenant, which was okay at the time, but now we get, or within the last few weeks, we had like set up 3 tenants per week. Then the apps team are under pressure to release apps on the App Store as quickly as possible, as well as the backend team needs to have everything running before that. So we're just trying to find a way of how we can speed everything up to a point where we can have a tenant created within a day with the apps released to the App Store.
Yeah, definitely a case of working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, very cool.
And just like I'm seeing it, as you said, it's about the human error. I mean, you can do, even if it takes a week to do an app or something to go out,
Yeah.
at least you know that it's not going to have mistakes in, because no matter how efficient and good you are, you're going to forget to do a port. It's going to be the wrong number, maybe happening concurrently, and you're going to end up with, I don't know if the duplicate ports matter, no, in like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So definitely having a way to script it is the only way, really.
Also, you don't
Script way or
want to
no
get to
way.
a point where it's only one person that knows how to do everything, and it ends up being that person's job. So that's a lot of the reasons why I want to automate it, because I'm the only one that knows how to do everything.
Yeah, so you're automating yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
So now you got to maintain the scripts.
Yeah. I think if I automate myself out of a job, I think I did a good job.
Yeah, but that's actually what we're all meant to be doing, is automate ourselves out of a job.
Yeah, I mean, there's much more interesting things to do than click on a portal and
yes,
get things done.
Ronald's got a Maui app on the side, and what actually happens is they say go and do this in the system, and then he waits a couple hours and he clicks the button in his app, and then it generates the stuff. He's like, "Yeah, I've done it, guys." Well, this one's taking me long.
Yeah. Meanwhile, he's sitting on the beach.
Yeah. Guys, I'm gonna have to work from home for 3 weeks. There's 4 tenants to set up. I think I might be able to crank them out.
Cool.
The bit too late.
All right. No, thanks for all that, and you showed off a whole bunch of stuff in there. So hopefully people found it interesting and maybe can adapt it. At least the way you showed off, automate your work. So work smart, work better. And if you can actually see that in your app, you don't have to go out there and make this great system to do everything. You can start and step by step and slowly add things. Maybe you can have multiple functions to do things, and because the whole portal is technically scriptable in a sense, you can do whatever you want. You should never be heading to that portal. If you're logging in there, you're working wrong, because who's remembering passwords? Who's managing permissions and stuff? Do it by the code.
And it's not just the creating of resources, for example. There's a lot of other ways that we use Azure Functions, for example. So the live stream that we serve out to tenants, that's normally like a HLS file, which with a lot of TS files. I'm not sure if you're familiar with audio, but that gets put into a storage account, and through the storage accounts, we can emit events like a new blob is being put onto a storage account, and we can take that event, put it in Azure Queues, for example, with the invisibility of like 6 days. And 6 days later, we'll change the access tier from hot to cold, so that old audio don't get retained on the hot tier. We dynamically change that after a certain period of time, because no one listens to a live stream that was yesterday or whatever.
Yeah, that's automate everything.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming. And I don't think there's any questions. No questions for that. All right. Thank you very much, and definitely interesting stuff. And I can pop my screen live. I'm assuming it's live. Let's just go with that. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. For those who stay to the end, thank you, especially for you. Don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube. If you want to have a session, as you saw, we have three random ones. You can speak on anything, whether it be code or anything. And if you have any topics in mind, just head over to Sessionize. There's a couple of text boxes you have to fill in, share your stuff, and we'll add you to the roster. And maybe next month or not next month, we've got some speakers, but the following months, and on that, we can add you to the list, and you can share what you know. And if you learned something recently, or you've known something for 20 years, it doesn't matter. You can share knowledge, because there's always someone else that doesn't know, or who can learn from it. So all knowledge is good. I think that's a valid statement. All knowledge is good, hopefully. But yeah, so thank you everyone for tuning in. Check out the links, and we'll see you next month. Same time, same place, same time, All right then. Cheerio. I don't know if Allan has anything to add, or if any special announcements.
Nicely. I suppose there is bad knowledge, but do you want to go into that? But yes, thank you everyone for attending. I know it's quite late, but thank you for everyone for sticking around. And don't forget, all these recordings will be on YouTube, so you can watch them at your leisure. But thank you very much, and good night. Hope to see you next month.
Cheerio.